All right, let's go to the next visitor statements from the discussion items. When we go to the RBH COVID-19 informational plan, I would like to, we did recognize the committee. I'd like to recognize the committee again. I'd like to express that the direction given to the committee from the board, the community members elected, was to develop an in-person learning environment. That was our goal as a community, was to have the kids back in school. So I think the committee, you can tell us the plan, but it was, I personally asked Kevin to administer and organize this committee in that direction. So go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you, Wes. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge, I wrote down some of the questions that we heard through citizen comments so that we can address some of those. This will take a good 20 minutes, so I would ask for your patience. I'll try to be brief. Mary Ann, the first page of the report, obviously this is the Transition COVID Committee. So you see myself as the superintendent, the assistant superintendent, principal, assistant principals, interim director of special ed, instructional coaches who are also faculty members at Riverside Brookfield High School, Christy Hughes, Lindsay Mino, Aubrey Prince. We had 4 representatives from the RBA exec board as well as faculty, Diane Bonarigo, Doug Schultz, Jenna Osborne, and Mark Helgeson. So in total, we had 7 faculty members on the committee. We had 7 administrators. We had 4 parents, Julie Lobley, Mike Murphy, Emery Dixon, and Tricia McVicker. And we also had 2 student advisors, Michael and Lily, who are also student board members. So we did feel that we addressed a lot of the stakeholders that were part of the committee so that we had a full gamut of input from only the students, the administration, parents, as well as teachers. I think everybody needs to understand, Dr. Freitas and I filmed that video and we sent that out to families on Friday. This is a very fluid situation. And while I understand the comments in the landmark may not be portrayed, and I apologize if they were portrayed wrongly, and I apologize if I offended anybody in the RBA, because I worked very closely especially over the last 3 months with Mr. Bonarigo to try to work out through our MOUs on stipends as well as being on this committee. And Dan and I talk probably 2 to 3 times a week just on different information that was shared. We talked 2 times this weekend. I was sitting at a baseball tournament for my son. I called Dan from the parking lot. We talked a little bit on Friday, and he shared the initial results from the RBE survey. So I feel it has been a very collaborative process. We also made sure that every Friday before those weekly communications went out, that anybody that was a parent on the committee, so the 4 parents as well as Christy Hughes, who is a parent and a faculty member, all had input on those communications to make sure we would be addressing parent concerns as well as student concerns that were being sent out. So again, I think we were doing the best we could in a short amount of time. As soon as the state went to phase 4 and the governor acknowledged under phase 4 that the schools can open up with in-person or some form of in-person learning, that was the goal of the committee. I also heard that it was irresponsible for not do a remote plan. The first thing the committee addressed in its first 2 meetings was to address a remote plan in the event we had to go remote. So we actually worked backwards. The committee work started with the remote plan. We did not post this plan right away because we knew that the goal of the committee and the direction of the board was to go in person. But the first thing we actually did was start with a remote so that at any time we couldn't effectively implement the in-person plan, we would be able to default to this remote plan. I will share that remote plan with you tonight. It was shared with the board. It was shared with the faculty last Thursday. And Mary Ann, can you go to the next slide, please? Keep going to the first model. Keep going, please, to the model. Okay, so, yeah, please continue. There you go. A little more. Hybrid model. So the hybrid model was put together based on the survey results that we sent out to the community. There were some concerns of why didn't we address in that original survey that went out to both the three groups. It went out to all students, it went out to all staff, and it went out to parents. So we addressed all three stakeholder groups. And we provided three different options of in-person learning. And the first thing we wanted to gauge was, what was your preference of an in-person learning model? There was some questions submitted of why, there was some concern shared from the RBA, well, why didn't you have a remote option on there? The task of the committee was to try to identify a way to open the schools with in-person learning. So that's why we sent out the three different models, knowing that the late start, full student body on campus, like a normal school year, would probably be the most unlikely until we have a vaccine. And then we offered the half-day option with no lunches, and then we offered the reduced enrollment option of a hybrid plan. Based on the feedback we received from the staff and from the families, hybrid and half-day option were the two popular options. The students were just over 52% in regards to the half-day option. They did not have the preference for the hybrid option. So we took a combination of the half-day option and the hybrid option, we put them together and came up with this hybrid model. The hybrid model was developed through this learning subcommittee, which was Dr. Freitas, Ms. Lindquist, Ms. Augustine, and all the teachers and faculty on the staff, and one parent, Ms. Julie Lobby. Michael. And so we had representation, again, from the stakeholder groups on this subcommittee to help put together this plan. Just briefly, I'll go through why this plan was developed the way it was. I'll give Ms. Lindquist a quick opportunity, or Dr. Freitas if they want to fill in anything. But Mondays, why do we choose Monday as a PLC day for staff as well as a remote learning day? The faculty on the committee felt it would be best to start their week for teachers by having this PLC time to get together with groups of the teachers or with their departments or department meetings to identify where students were at after each week of hybrid learning. And so that's why we put this on Mondays. So the first hour and a half of that Monday is for faculty to do professional development, PLC time, which is professional learning community time, for them to go through whether they need to share data, planning, any kind of problem solving that each department or teachers needed to do. And then we had the synchronous learning. Synchronous learning is a buzzword that's come out very strongly through COVID, and that's like learning at the same time. So basically similar to in-class learning, in sync learning. And so the idea of the Monday is that there'd be a 25-minute check-in for each student with their teachers to go through their schedule and get kind of the lay of the land for the week, what you'll be doing in person as well as in your virtual classes. And then those virtual office hours, again, are for interventions, makeup, if the student had to take a sick day, had to miss work, do things like that. So they would have times where they could either Zoom with a teacher, Google Hangout with a teacher, or see a teacher for individual help. What we tried to do with the in-person model is so that a student would get through their schedule at least once a week in person. And so the A through L students would come on Monday through Tuesday, for 8 to 11:55. There'd be a 40-minute break for teachers, as well as time for students to transition out of the building. And then the M through Z students would take online classes where the teachers can teach from their classroom. Now, we have talked a little bit through some of the accommodation requests we receive on whether or not we will allow some teachers to work from home or teach remotely during this portion to accommodate their requests. And so we were still working through that, those types of variables with the committee as well as with the administration. And then on Wednesday, and then there's virtual office hours at the end of the day for those students to get some interventions from teacher. Wednesday basically flips that schedule. So the M through Z students are in person for periods 1 through 4, and then the A through L students are online for 5th, 6th, and 7th. Some people have asked, we've received a lot of questions of why A through L, M through Z, not freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. We have a lot of mixed classes. We have a lot of classes that have sophomores, juniors, and seniors. And so it made sense to do it A through L instead of by grade level. Thursday then flips the schedule so that students have 5, 6, and 7 in the morning, and then an opportunity for in-person intervention or makeup. And then 1 through 4, it's virtually for the M through Z students, and then that schedule is flipped again for the M through Z are in person on Friday, A through L are in the afternoon. We had a long discussion on the committee. as I I'll touch on the Apex model here in a little bit, but we had a long discussion in the committee early in the process. If students, before the governor came out and said you had to have 2 plans, one in person and one remote, we had talked about this hybrid model serving both of our populations. We had talked with the teachers on the committee about the possibility of streaming their lessons while they were teaching live in the classroom and streaming to kids at home who couldn't come on campus. That was not a popular decision by the committee. The teachers were concerned, as well as even some of the building administration, that it would be a task that teachers wouldn't be able to manage, trying to supervise, teach, instruct, and help the kids that were in person, and then trying to answer questions or do things with the students online. So we went as far as researching some webcams and talking about that in depth as a committee and as a learning subcommittee, and that's where we came back and said that that was probably not the best option to do filming of the teachers' individual classrooms. Ms. Lindquist and Dr. Freitas, anything on the hybrid model that I missed?
No, boss, I believe, you covered it, but there was one question. This is from Lisa Gaynor, and I just want to say thank you to all the parents who have submitted questions. Guys, you are never a bother. We are here to service you guys. So, though it's shocking when we have 50 emails at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, our job is to service you all. So please continue to send us questions because we are here to serve you all. But one of the questions is how can we ensure, and this is from Lisa Gaynor, how can we ensure that only 3 days of learning with teacher, in parentheses, in-person or synchronous, is enough to ensure that the full class curriculum can be taught? Okay. Kelly, you want to answer that first? Okay. So ensuring that the entire curriculum could be taught, and then I'll give my thoughts.
I mean, we certainly recognize for any school in any model that they go back to school, that there is going to be some challenge to a reduction of the amount of time that students are either in person or taking the fact that students may not be at a school building at all. And so, is there a possibility that every single thing that we would cover in a normal school year is not going to be able to be hit at this point? Yes, that's a reality that we need to face. And so there is, conversations that take place where we have to start talking about essential skills, what students need, what sort of skills they need to be able to take with them from one year to the next or from one semester to the next. The fact of the matter is, whether we are in a fully remote situation where students are receiving their instruction virtually, or whether we are in an in-person hybrid model where we are reduced, none of those options are going to be the same type of education, the same coverage of education, the same scope of education as it would be in a normal school year. And I think that's something that we're going to be adjusting for a while now, because going back to school in the way that we know it to be, I think is going to take a long time for us to get back to. And so we are going into this knowing that we are going to have to be creative in how we approach that. Any way that we approach differently than a regular school year where our students are with our teachers every single day and they are receiving the best instruction possible from our staff, any deviation from that is going to be a challenge, and we're going to have to adjust for that.
Dr. Freitas, anything on the hybrid real quick?
Well, really quick, just to add to what Ms. Lindquist said, guys, as a creator of curriculum at one of my previous schools, a curriculum is a live document that is always evolving. It's evolving with different classes. It's evolving when we learn new teaching strategies. So what we're going to ask of our teachers, of our partners in learning, is that we look and analyze the curriculum carefully to make sure that we cover the essential topics to the best of our abilities. I know there could be some things that are missed, but if we focus on the skills and we modify the curriculum, we believe we can do a good job at covering many important topics for every subject matter.
There was one more question that really quickly, there was a question that was asked, I think just today, about why students who attend school first through fourth period, like an A through L student, why that student doesn't go home and then log in for fifth through seventh and continue the rest of their schedule. And I just wanted to give you a little insight to that. In reducing the population of the students, obviously, we're keeping some students at home each day, and so that decision was made so that every population of students, every cohort of students, either A through L or M through Z, has some kind of school each day. And we recognize that if I'm a teacher and I'm teaching my first through fourth period classes in person, there's a pretty strong chance that my fifth through seventh period classes with a reduced amount of time and virtual potentially could be in different places. I'm managing now 2 cohorts of students, so my M through Z kiddos are not going to be at the same place on Tuesday during fifth period as my A through L kiddos. It's going to take longer to keep all of our kids in the same place. So that's why the decision was made for students not to just go home at 11:55 on Tuesday and then immediately log in at 12:45, because we want each cohort to have some form of school each day.
We also thought by opening the school year in a hybrid model allows some students to meet their teachers, establish relationships and routines. We talked with the RBEA and with the faculty and staff last Thursday during a voluntary staff meeting about the importance of doing social emotional learning with the students during the time they're in person. While we understand it's important to also get into curriculum, but we also wanted to make sure that we were covering the social emotional learning, like you heard tonight from a few of the students, that they knew they had some, teachers were working to build those, back up those relationships we lost fourth quarter from last year, as well as some of that FaceTime with students so that they can feel supported, start establishing those relationships so in the event we have to go remote. The next thing I'd like to show, do we feel the hybrid model is safe? We think this provides us the best opportunity to implement the social distancing that was in the IDPH and the governor's guidelines, up to 6 feet when possible, reduced enrollment, we've eliminated lunch periods, and then some of the other safety measures that were discussed about increasing the HVAC, hand sanitizers and wipes in each classroom, doing thermal scans. We think this is the safest model in order to try to bring students back on campus. The next slide, Mary Ann, is the student orientation model. So a lot of questions have been asked about this. So we recognize as a committee that this is a very fluid situation. And so as a committee, we came up with the student orientation model so that students by grade level can come A through L, M through Z on campus and meet their teachers, get general expectations, get general guidelines, maybe get syllabus, put a name with a face. We think this is very important to with whatever model we choose, because we want to have students know who they're working with. It's intimidating enough for a freshman to start their first day of high school, but then to give them a Chromebook and say, hey, go online and figure out who your teacher is, what they look like, what their expectations are. Well, we don't know if that's the best thing for kids right now. And there's also this orientation model. It kind of provides us very similar to a restaurant of a soft opening. It gives us an opportunity to bring 200 students into the building, or slightly under 200 students in the building for each portion of the day, to see how those thermal scans work, the temperature checks, the one-way hallways, the social distancing in classrooms. Now, I've said this on the video, and I think I've said this to the faculty when I met with them last week. This soft opening also gives us an opportunity to realize if we could pull off this hybrid model. And at any time during this orientation process, if we feel that, hey, there's still some things we need to work out, or that if we had trouble doing it with 200 students, how are we going to do it with 800 students starting the next week? We would have to shut down and go to full remote until we could work out those details and reassemble the committee to try to work out those details. I want the parents and I want the staff, and the board knows this already because I've talked with them on multiple occasions and each month when we've met. This is a very fluid situation. If we're moving more than one day at a time or 1 week at a time, we're kidding ourselves. Because we could be doing things great here in the hybrid model and everything could be set up great. If we have an uptick for a couple days in our community, it may not make sense to bring students back on campus. It may make sense to go back to remote. All of these variables have to be taken into account. So this is why we came up with this student orientation model, and then we put a teacher planning day at the end of that week so that after teachers had an opportunity to work for 4 days with smaller groups of students and to get the students on campus, they could then prepare for the next week of instruction, whether that's hybrid or remote, but also prepare for like, hey, I realize this now that I had students in my classroom, we need to make this adjustment. or I need to move my desks around in my classroom so that there's more room for social distancing, or whatever it may be. Student orientation. Kylie, anything on that?
No, I think you got it.
Dr. Freitas, anything on student orientation?
No, I think you explained that everything well, boss.
Okay, and people watching on TV, and I know some of my parents that are in the stands. I can see everybody adjusting their backs. It's not comfortable to sit on these bleachers, so I'm trying to go as quick as possible. So I apologize if it sounds like I'm rushing. Marianne, can you show the next model, please? Okay, so this is the fully remote model. As I stated earlier in the year, and this will be sent out to parents once we get started, but we didn't want to put this out to people because we wanted to encourage people the goal of the committee was to work in person to try to develop under phase 4 of the governor's guidelines an in-person model. We had put together a hybrid the remote learning model. The first thing we did as a committee, that's where we spent our first 2 weeks on, was developing a remote model, because we all recognize that at any time during this process, if things are not safe, if there's an uptick in cases, if we're not able to successfully implement our hybrid model plan, this would have to be our default option. So this was actually the first thing we did, it's not something we did not do. We actually tweaked this model again in the last 2 weeks to reflect closer to the hybrid model from input of the committee, so that in the event we have to go from hybrid remote or remote hybrid, there was a lot of similarities in what kids were doing. So having their first period and then virtual work in the afternoon, breaking up the days so that students the Monday was exactly the same whether it was in hybrid or remote. So this is the remote model. Now, we did field some questions on there. Basically, it's 4 hours of synchronous teaching with about an hour and 20 for student work in the afternoon to kind of work on things that they learn in their classes, and then time at the end of the day for teachers to have office hours. There was a question submitted, well, what are teachers doing during the student independent work time? Teachers will be available to answer student questions, to meet with students individually, to take phone calls, to continue to plan with students. So it's not that the teachers are off for that hour and 20 minutes, it's just that's an opportunity for them to work with individual students, field emails, work with students who maybe had to miss a day, catch up something. So there's time built in for that. Kyle, you want to continue anything on the remote model?
There was one question that, and I think it was mentioned earlier in the comment section, there's some questions about why students aren't logging into synchronous virtual instruction all day, every day. And I think one of the students that was up kind of commented, and that opened the door for one of the considerations that we made. Having lived the fourth quarter, none of us thought it was wise to put students in front of a computer for 8 hours a day, for even 6 hours a day. There's lots of information out there that talks about that is not something that's beneficial to students, for them to be staring in at their Chromebook all day. So we wanted to try to balance the synchronous virtual instruction with some time for students to have some independent time, work through some things on their own, grapple a little bit, experience some struggle, right, and still ask questions. But we were very, very conscious when we made this schedule about the amount of screen time that a student would have. And we also were trying to consider, as we did in fourth quarter, what is going on at a student's house. And the response to that question is we don't know what's going on at a student's house when they're at home. If we are looking at, and when we were developing the fully remote schedule, we were operating under the governor's orders or the ISB suggestion, the governor's suggestion that we come into school if we can. So in our minds, as we were creating this, the fully remote schedule was one that would be enacted if we had to go into remote learning. And we know that from fourth quarter, some of our students, as we were forced into remote learning, have parents who are essential workers, and they are at home with their brothers, with their sisters. They are taking care of students. They have parents that may have lost jobs. There's a lot of things that are going on in a student's family that we wanted to take into consideration, and we just didn't feel that it was appropriate to put students on a Zoom call from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., and that is why that decision was made, to give some student independent work time in the afternoons.
So, Kylie, I don't mean to interrupt, but it looks like there's only 2.5 hours on Wednesday and Friday.
Because we have an odd schedule, yes. So that was the trick, is figuring out how to even that out with 7 periods.
It just strikes me that this fully remote is almost just like the spring. I don't remember that's about how much time they spent in the spring, and it didn't work very well for
I
me
think the
and my
main thing that
family.
the main feedback that we've gotten, the piece that was perhaps missing in the spring was that scheduled synchronous virtual instruction. And so we're trying to balance, right? The amount that we're having students logged on, but we're also trying to make a routine for students. And we're trying to also develop some of their independence as they are home remote learning. So that was our challenge. Sure, if we had an 8-period day, it would have looked very different. So we built in those virtual office hours
So
to
why
give
couldn't we
students
do it more like Monday? You've got Monday, you've got 3.5, maybe almost 4 hours.
We
These
were
other days, you
looking
have 2
at
hours.
depth versus breadth in that situation. So when you look at Monday and you see that students are with their teachers 25 minutes, that's like the initial check-in to kind of send them off on a successful week. Doing that every single day of the week, I can say from my teaching background, it would be challenging for me to be able to get into the depth of the curriculum if I was only seeing my students 25 minutes at a time. And so that's why we spaced that out and we broadened that instructional time on those other days.
So the different, I guess I'm just trying to count hours here. We've got 15 hours of learning in the remote. And if I go back to in person, there's like 25 hours of learning. So I think we're getting cheated. Maybe I'm wrong.
Can we use questions then?
Yeah. Jump, I mean, let's do
Yeah, I mean,
talk
I
about this.
appreciate the concern of students being on a screen all day. I'm on Zoom meetings all day, every day, and it can be a challenge, for sure. But those students that aren't motivated, those students that don't need the extra help, those students that don't need the teacher office hours, they've got a lot of time off. I'm extremely concerned
I'm-
because I know a lot of kids who are just going to play video games every afternoon.
Yeah, I mean,
They
I
just
got
they just are.
This middle kid, all right? He's not that high learner. He's not number 5 in the class. He's not going to go in independent study, but he's not a low learner. He doesn't need all this one-on-one time. He's going to fall behind. He's not going to learn anything. And we're going to go to college and we're going to say, oh well, it's a gap year. It's COVID. All my teachers taught from home. I
So
don't know if
I'm not seeing an hours total under the hybrid, and I thought I saw that at one point.
It's,
I believe it's at the bottom.
But it's 12,
it was on the
in
bottom,
class.
I'm not sure if it got
It's
cut
on the
off
next
of this.
Okay, 12 in class plus 5 independent is the fully remote, right?
Correct.
So that's 17. So what are the actual instruction hours on the hybrid?
It's on page
Just about 7 in person, if you count the in-person, 8 in person, and then they get an additional, I think, 4 in virtual.
I mean, I think, kind of to piggyback on what you were saying, Gina, I think in both cases, you're looking at a remarkably decreased amount of instruction time.
Right.
Yeah, because it's essentially 12:30 to 3:05 every day, and on Wednesday and Fridays, it's 10:35 to 3:05, that there's no synchronous interaction.
Virtual office hours, don't the teachers have a period office hour anyway?
Teachers have a planning, they have a conference and prep period, but that's not a period, that's not where
not
they
the
would
same
meet
thing.
with students.
That doesn't count on Monday, like 2 hour and a half and an hour.
So the teacher's contractual 5 periods
We
and
got
then
a
they're
lot
2.
of teacher time off here.
The teacher contractual time within the hybrid schedule, or the remote schedule, is they still do their periods 1 through 7. So if they had a planning period or a conference period to call parents, those still happen under dedicated period. The virtual office hours, we were expecting them to be available to students for in-person intervention if they needed it via Zoom or Google Hangout on the remote model. The one thing that's changed that the committee discussed very early, and this is from feedback from the board and from Dr. Freitas, put out a stakeholder survey at the end of 4th quarter that went to students, staff, and parents. So again, another piece of information where we polled all stakeholders. We had an executive summary from the fourth quarter where we had the e-learning or the remote learning for fourth quarter when the pandemic first hit. And one of the biggest things we had was, the not having a set schedule, teachers not being on in person daily with students. And so what we've changed here is that the intent would be teachers would be on campus working from their classroom, so they still had classroom resources, reliable internet service, the ability to demonstrate a lab if they wanted to, or demonstrate something with the resources they have in their classroom, and have like almost a virtual class with the students online. So that was the improvements we've made since the fourth quarter e-learning.
Was there ever consideration given where, because I can appreciate keeping the schedule similar for the kids, was there any consideration given that on Tuesday, if it's only periods 1 through 4, that those periods 1 through 4 were extended? So maybe instead of it being, a 40, 45-minute period, could they meet for an hour? So they get a little bit more instruction, but then there's still time for student independent work time, just not as much.
You're saying for Wednesday and Friday when they're hour of virtual office hours because we don't have the 8th period? Maybe do those periods longer or all
Just for
periods?
every day. I've gone online to a lot of other surrounding high schools, and our plan is the least robust per minute. It just is.
I will say that the intention of the committee in that 1 to 2:20 student independent work time, that would be time where students would be carrying through what they did 1 through 4 of their periods. We're looking at our teachers giving students extended work, extended practice, where they would be practicing those skills. So the intention behind the committee in the structuring of this was truly that students would be working during that time, and that there would be a carryover from what they did in the beginning half of the day into that student independent work time, which is why the virtual office hours then are after it, because essentially, right, it's the I do, we do, you do. So when we're in the 1 through 4 periods, we're able to do some guided practice and talk about the things that students are going to practice on their own, give them an opportunity to practice it in that orange band where the independent work time is, and then end each day with an opportunity for students to then ask more questions. But I certainly see what you're saying. I'm taking some notes on
Yeah,
that.
and I appreciate with all the work that the committee did. I just know in my household in the spring, my son finished his work in record time. It wasn't very rigorous. And I'll be honest, there were teachers that he did not see past March.
Yeah.
He didn't. There was no Zoom. And I understand it was difficult, right? Like you're survival mode at that point. But there were classes that he did not see the teacher on any online platform once past March. Not once. And one teacher, he did have a Zoom, and they played video games
Yeah, it's
together.
like they dialed it in.
It wasn't robust, and I get it.
So
It was
why-
survival
so-
mode. I just don't want that to happen again. That's my greatest fear. And I know a lot of parents out there are extremely concerned with that as well.
Revisit why we can't stream the class. Why can't we stream?
Can't what?
Periods 1, if we go to this,
Streaming. Oh, I know.
Or the hybrid?
the hybrid, and we go on Tuesday, why you can't stream the in-person on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, so a child who is at home for all these extenuating circumstances can basically take all their classes.
One of the things that we talked about with regard to the live streaming piece, because I certainly know, of course, that there are some schools that are going that route. There's a couple issues when you look at the hybrid model and you consider the live streaming. One is that when you reduce the number of kids that are in the building and we have those opposite schedules, again, you have 2 cohorts of students that could be in different places, and so that presents a challenge. The other, because it certainly was talked about, the idea, right, that school just happens as it happens, and half the kids are at home and half the kids are in the building watching. I did teaching, I taught for a long time, for 13 years, and I can tell you that managing the students that are in front of you and the questions and the interactions and the genuine interaction that it takes to create a culture and a community of learners in the classroom, and then also have to worrying about a second entire community of students who are at home. I don't know how you do that effectively as a teacher.
Don't we have support staff? What are they doing? Can't they help with this?
I mean, we have
It's like a
support
TA
staff.
in college, right?
We don't have
We don't
support
have
staff
that in every
assigned to every
class.
teacher.
No, we wouldn't need it in PE, and we wouldn't need it in
Sure.
some classes. We'd only need it in the STEM classes, right?
Well, I wouldn't say you would only need it in STEM classes. I mean, if I'm teaching an English class and I am working with the students who are in front of me, I have questions popping up that are on the computer, we're talking about two very different worlds. And so am I turning away from the kids that I'm supposed to be managing, wearing their masks and social distancing, and am I worrying about these kids on the computer and what they're doing? Right? I think we're asking our teachers to be in two different places at the same time. And to me, as a teacher, that feels like I'm teaching two classes at once. And I don't think if I'm doing that, I'm giving either of those my best or full attention.
Could there be a compromise here where maybe first quarter and then you guys collect data to see on student engagement? And I mean, I don't know what exactly data you'd want to collect, but just to see
Well, I think
how many
take
students
these
are
core
taking advantage
classes-
of work
Something
time.
similar
If we
to
take
that
these core
survey we
classes
talked
and
about
Look at how
from-
we could possibly put 2 teachers in a core class. Maybe we could accomplish that.
Got to hear.
I was gonna say, I think we need, regardless of how we end up here, we need some kind of a survey similar to what we saw after the end of the spring, right? Because we all know it was absolutely scrambling, but it was not successful. So how do we then identify what was not successful moving forward?
Well, I don't think we had a good survey, though, at the end of spring on how parents felt the education experience was. It's more anecdotal, where people started to see what their college students were doing, what their high school students were doing. That would have been helpful to ask parents, how did you feel your students?
we did.
You feel your students would get the equivalent education? What I heard is no. Did you feel your students had time to interact with other students and had group discussion? What I heard was no. And that would have given us a little more fodder. But I think moving forward, we absolutely need parent feedback on the quality of education the kids are getting with this model.
So we did have an executive summary that Hector did present on that. It basically highlighted the concerns you're saying tonight. Parents were not happy with the e-learning. They recognized that it was a scramble, but they also some of the comments that were brought up about not seeing teachers online, not having a set schedule. There were a lot of gaps. We did have that survey. Dr. Freda shared that with the committee. That's why we first started to present the put together the remote model in the committee. We established about teachers being on campus to teach their classes. But I do think it's important that whatever model we decide to implement tonight and start the year off with or move to, I think a quarterly survey to get feedback from the parents and students would be helpful.
And I think it's even more than student to teacher. We have to remember that, whether we're using Zoom or whatever platform, it's student to student. The discussion got lost. And so maybe as we grow this model, we could use more time online. Maybe some of that office hours could become discussion time with 4 or 5 students, because that's where a lot of learning happens also.
Well, I think that could be the goal of the orange, right? Is small group instruction, interventions, there's a class that has projects, so I'm meeting, and you can literally have 5 Google Meets windows open at once on your computer and be monitoring or waiting for them to interact with you. So you could do some kind of group work
One of
like
the benefits
that.
here is we're small enough. We can pivot. We can do that, what you're talking about. We can take it at a quarter and get feedback from the students and the teachers. And
Yeah,
how
almost
are
like a
they doing
time
and
audit.
how can we do it better? And we can quickly move and do it better every quarter. And that's the goal, right? Is to teach students the best we can in this crazy environment, which was, I circle back to the goal of in-person learning, because it's the best way to teach children.
Yeah, and I know we all agree that in the spring, it's not that it was not working at all. It just wasn't good enough. We all know this. All models presented tonight are already addressing this. I appreciate the concern about screen time, but screen time is just one of many factors that layer in this extremely complex analysis of what is best for the entire RB community. So I actually very much agree with some of the questions about, regardless of what happens tonight, the planning doesn't stop. And just in general, I greatly appreciate, the thoughtfulness of all the comments from all sides. But I would rather overshoot in our ambition in what the plans are set up now. And then, if we get feedback from the students and teachers and everybody says, that would be, I think that it would make me feel more comfortable as opposed to going at it from the other end and saying, because we're worried about screen time and this and that, we come up with a relatively conservative plan if I compare it with what other great high schools are doing. And I would personally support pushing this in the other direction and really challenging all of us to see whether we should consider some of this.
Yeah, I also think with the hybrid, we're opening the chance for labs. I had a college student who really felt that she lost a lot by not getting the end of her labs. Some of our high school students not getting their labs, at least with this hybrid. I mean, you can't not have the lab for a semester or a year for certain classes. You just can't have that. You might end up having to repeat it or take another class in college in order to be qualified to take that class. So some things just don't translate online. And so it's nice to have the opportunity, as long as we can, while things are stable, to be able to have those experiences.
Okay, are there any more curriculum? I think this is a curriculum part, and then we'll get into
So just a couple of
actual
small,
going into school.
operational questions. So
Yeah.
on the fully remote, is it fair to equate that student independent work time to homework? Like there would not be additional homework? Like this is their
There could be additional homework. But this would be a place where they can start and then circle back with teachers to ask questions, or if they needed time to work on
I think
a
that's
project.
important for parents to understand, right? That
Correct.
there's the school day and there still might be additions to the school day.
Correct.
And then,
So the state's guidelines are 2.5 hours of synchronous learning, and then up to a total of 5 hours a day. And that could be through independent study, group work, online fitness, doing different things.
okay. And then in both cases, clubs and extracurriculars and sports are all still slotted in that 3:05 slot in a more traditional after school.
Can't hear you, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Okay. So in both models, the clubs, the extracurriculars, the athletics, they all began in that same after-school time frame, or would we ever see those clubs or activities meet
Outside
during?
of the educational day that's set up.
Okay.
So we would not start things earlier.
Okay. So I wanted to make sure about that.
Right.
And then, and this may or may not be a curriculum question, but on the hybrid, so what is the estimated number of persons you're going to have in the building then?
So we talked about this today. Kirsten, do you want to answer that? You want to start with this, or do you want me to take that?
I believe Kylie was looking at that data.
Kylie, you have that information?
Have you? Yeah, of course, guys. Yeah, I have some numbers here. So one of the questions that was submitted was, what is the anticipated class size and building size during in-person school days for the hybrid model? Currently, the average would be, under the hybrid model, 16.8 students per classroom, and roughly we should have about short of 1,000 people, so maybe 800 students, another 150 to 200 adults.
Okay, thank you.
So 16 is the class size?
Yes, 16.8 to be specific.
Make for a safe lab environment.
Ms. Towner reminded me, tonight is our first meeting with our 2 student board members who also, student advisors, who also participated. So before I go into the Apex and how that all came about, do you want to touch on the fully, since Michael, you were on the learning committee, Lily, you were on the committee, you want to talk about the hybrid model, the virtual model?
Yeah, you can go first. Okay, so
Gotta speak up, Lily.
yeah, I think that the hybrid model is the best option personally, because I think we all agree that in-person learning is the most effective. In fact, I'm pretty sure everyone thinks that, except there are the health concerns, and I see both sides, so I don't want to, put anyone's views, belittle any of them. But yeah, I think mental health is a big concern. I know some students talked about that, and that does have to play with screen time. I'm a senior right now, and I've started writing my college essays, and I'll just look at my personal statement for like 6 hours straight, and it just hurts my brain a little bit, because just staring at into my computer screen for so long isn't really ideal. I prefer doing my work handwritten, so if teachers could give handwritten work during the the
Hybrid?
the student independent work time, that could, how they used to give homework in person. Like before we went on to quarantine and were released from school, my chemistry teacher gave me a bunch of packets, hard copy packets, so that I could do my work for the next couple weeks worth with my pencil instead of on my laptop. But I think that since grades are being counted, there's no state mandates or whatnot saying that you have to let students pass classes, then I think that students will actually start trying during their independent work time, as opposed to just taking the time off as they did in the spring. I think that'll help somewhat. Obviously, things weren't great back in the spring. A lot of classes were really easy to just tread your way through and get a good grade. But I think that if students start doing their homework in the work time and attend virtual office hours, that it kind of gives them incentive to do it if grades are actually being counted. So I think that will help. And I hope that we're able to pursue an in-person school day. But I understand that we might have to go full remote.
Michael?
Yeah, so with when I was during the spring, when I was online, I think the only time I did Zoom meetings was for physics and math, and that was for just help. So I didn't have any Zoom meetings, as said before, and I think that if we don't have any of that face-to-face learning, even online, it's just not going to be as efficient. And and most of my time is going to be spent just doing online modules or some type of online work that I don't think I'll learn much on. And the material that I learned for like AP classes, let's say, I feel like all of that was before the pandemic. During the pandemic, there was a lot less work given, and I don't think that prepared me enough for some AP classes. That was just from my classes. With the online learning, I think it's about the same amount of time if we're doing hybrid, because of the split in alphabetical, and I don't see a problem with that either. For the independent work time as well, I think that that's important since we're going to be at home and we're not going to be in class, because in class we would have that extra time to speak or collaborate with our peers, but online it's a lot different because of even interruptions in the internet can cause a lot of things to go wrong, like disconnecting and connecting, and I think that just having that work time is really going to help.
Thank you.
Do you mind if I comment again?
Go ahead, Lily, add one more thing.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, I think that it's really important for labs to be in person. As you can see, a lot of college students are actually going back, but most of their classes will be online. But what they're going back for is more of the STEM classes with the labs, like biology and whatnot, so that they can get that hands-on lab experience. That is really crucial, and that's really important for a lot of the science classes at RB. And I think that a schedule will definitely just help everything, because a lot of my teachers, I actually think all of my teachers did Zooms during spring on a scheduled basis. Like I would have 2 AP US History Zooms a week, 2 Chemistry Zooms a week at scheduled times, but it was different for every teacher, so I can't say that's for everybody. But I think that the schedule definitely helped when it had that. And
Okay, let's keep moving real quick. Next is the Apex portion. So I want to just touch on briefly. I know this has drawn a lot of attention. On July 23rd, the governor came out and said parents, school districts need to offer whatever their primary model would be, but also a fully remote model if students or families requested it. And we were pretty much as a committee close to being finalizing with our remote and our hybrid plan and actually talking about if we would want to release it sooner. And then that direction came out. And so that was within 2 weeks of our August 3rd deadline. And so we went around as a committee and we're discussing and trying to figure out what would be a way so that teachers wouldn't have to be, so we actually we're trying to figure out a way where teachers wouldn't have to manage 2 plans at the same time. And so it was brought up in the committee that we had used Apex, and that's where I told them that I saw something similar with the school in the western suburbs that was for any parent that wanted to do fully remote, they were allowing students to do an online like Illinois Virtual High School or Edgenuity. And so we have an Apex coordinator on staff, and that's why how we landed on the Apex. Now that was not vetted as thoroughly as these hybrid models and remote models, but again, it was because we were trying to adhere to the governor's mandate and to the short amount of time before we opened school. So it was suggested by Mr. Bonarigo and I believe another teacher on the committee in our second meeting that maybe we should be reaching out to the people that have selected Apex, and if they feel comfortable with their student being able to do the hybrid model but not attend the in-person instruction, but then use that almost like a makeup day, like if they were just like a regular school day when they were absent, they would be responsible for getting those assignments from the teacher, working on the makeup work, using the virtual office hours to then address, have some teacher interaction time to then address the things that they missed on the in-person learning. And so that's where we originally were when we came up with this hybrid model, because we knew there would be some families that had emailed us that said they don't want to come back on campus until there's a vaccine. And then we have some other families that were adamant that they wanted, back to normal, full instruction. So we were trying to meet in the middle with everybody to try to come up with some type of solution that would appease everyone. And so the late mandate from the governor on July 23rd did throw us a curveball, and that's why we ended up kind of deferring to this Apex model. We understand it's not, it was never the committee's intent to do that. We also understand that it's not an RB teacher, although you will have an RB staff member who serves as the Apex coordinator and can provide help. You still have access to your counselor, your social worker, all the extracurriculars that will be running at the school. That was like for those parents that were set on, hey, we just want to do a fully remote model for first semester until the overall management of the pandemic around the country becomes more clear. And even when reaching out to the families on Apex, we've only had about 33 switch over. We still have roughly 100 that just want to do fully remote or fully Apex. So we have reached out to those families. We still have about 1,030 roughly that have chosen the hybrid. Then we have the 33 families that said they're going to try the hybrid but not do the in-person. And then we still have roughly 100, 110 that are still aligned with the Apex model.
Dr. Skankis, I think we should also mention, though, that the Apex model is not a lesser model. We've used it many times for credit recovery. It might not be our teachers, but it's definitely curriculum taught by other educators, different teachers. So this is still quality education. So it's not a lesser option. It's a different option. I think, Kristen, you've used it often for the credit recovery.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons there is a misconception about Apex is because it has been used for credit recovery at RB. And in using it in credit recovery, we structure that differently. If students can test out of they can test out of units if they show proficiency in credit recovery. They need to meet a 60% mastery in order to move on, and that would not be the case if you selected Apex for the remote option. You would take all of them. You would take all of the units, and you would get the grade that you earned. And so students would have to take modules over again if they had a 60%. If they wanted to get a better grade in the class than a 60%, students would go through the entire course. So I understand why there's maybe a misconception about Apex because we have used it for credit recovery and structured that differently in the past. In the remote option, we plan to structure that differently so that students do have a full, robust experience in Apex. And there are many courses that we don't use in credit recovery that we would use in the remote option, several AP classes and several other rigorous courses as well.
Yeah, so these are all accredited classes by credentialed educators.
Yeah, and I think, the teachers, one of the teachers that came up to speak tonight, he hit the nail on the head when he said the teachers understand that the best type of instruction is students being back on campus. But right now, we're not sure if we can manage that 100% because of the pandemic. We know as an administration that Apex is not the best option, but we had to provide an option for parents that don't feel safe of coming on campus.
Right.
And then there were some concerns like, well, I don't know if 3 days is enough for my student, and that's a lot of independent work. We feel that we might just want to stay with the Apex model. So, we're really trying to appease the people that want to come to school, the people that want to be online, people that want to have both. So it's a lot of moving pieces. That's why it's a very fluid situation. Kylie, Hector, anything on the Apex piece before I move on? Okay. Almost done, folks, I promise. The remote learning, obviously you saw the plan. This has to be our fallback plan because at any time we could end up having to go to remote learning. The reason that we had talked about putting out the orientation week and starting in the hybrid model is we feel that at the time the committee had felt that any type of in-person instruction that could occur between students and teachers to build relationships, build routines, get into some type of routine would help those students whenever we had to flip to remote. Somebody else mentioned this tonight, that the cold and flu season is expected to be worse now under the pandemic. We have heard the same thing. And so we know that possibly during the cold and flu season, if we're going to be remote, we think students would be more successful in remote if they had a few weeks of in-person instruction under the hybrid model. And so that's why we were originally at the hybrid model. Obviously, with all the schools choosing to close in the last 2 weeks, I think that's what's caused some discord, and some concerns from our staff, like why we're one of the only schools still left trying this. But again, because we're a small school, we don't have busing. We're very flexible. We've been a one-to-one school now for over 5 years. I think we have some things in our favor. We have great staff here. I think there's some things that we could do to pull off this hybrid model. All that being said, there are some things that are out of anybody on the committee's control, the teacher's control, and we have to manage these 4 variables on a regular basis. There was an article today in the Landmark about the increase in cases in Riverside. So obviously we're watching that very closely. So at any time there was an outbreak of cases or a consistent increase in cases in Brookfield, Riverside, North Riverside, or in our feeder patterns, we would have to consider going remote. At any time if the governor, State Board of Education, IDPH, Cook County Health Department came out and had concerns with our areas or concerns in schools in general and went back to phase 3, we would be going back to remote. Staffing issues. So we've talked with our faculty about even if we're on remote, we want teachers on campus teaching from the school, so there's not those internet problems, and that teachers can demonstrate labs and have full access to all the resources in their classroom. And we have received a lot of teachers that have picked up paperwork about having to take leave of absences due to child care needs and some other issues. So, at some point, we're working to try to accommodate some of those requests, but at the same time, toe the line of we really want you on campus, even if we're in a remote model, educating our students so it's a better experience for our students. The fourth variable that would force us to go to fully remote if we started in this hybrid model, and that's the board's decision, is if it's an unmanageable process. And I know this raised some concerns from the teachers when I met with them about, well, what do you mean it's an unmanageable process? The committee put it together. If you can't guarantee it's safe, we shouldn't be doing it. I don't know anybody that can guarantee anything right now during the global pandemic. We had this conversation again. I met with the union again this morning. I think we have all the safety procedures, as you heard from the one parent email that Ms. Dixon read, that we're encouraging social distancing, wearing of masks, hand washing, putting hand sanitizer, increasing our cleaning schedule, reducing the number of students in the building, eliminating lunch periods, grab-and-go lunches. We're taking all the necessary steps that were recommended, but I can't sit here as your superintendent and guarantee you, like, did we miss something? Is there a chance that a kid could test positive and could come into our school? I think that same thing happens when you go into Walgreens, when you go into a gas station, wherever you go today. You don't know who you're around or who they've been in contact with. And so I can't sit here and tell you that it's a perfect and it's a guarantee that no one's going to get sick or that we're not going to have any problems. And I wanted to make sure I said that because that was a concern that was very clear from my teaching staff or from the teaching staff in the district. And that's why we put that orientation week in place because, again, I don't want to sound repetitive, but if we can't operate with 200 kids at a time in the building and we think there's some things that need to be readdressed, we can default to that remote model and revisit the hybrid plan or revisit the timing of the hybrid plan and then reinstitute it. So those would be the main variables used if we were decide to go into remote learning. Go ahead.
For me as a board member, and that last point, it's hard for me as a board member to wrap my mind around that because some of us who are working as essential workers, you know, during the night, I work at UPS. There's 1,000 of us going to work every shift, 4 shifts a day, 7 days a week. We get a temperature scanned. They put the safety features. There's masks. And every teacher, every family here is ordering packages, and we are working like it's Christmas around the clock. And I come home and sleep 3 hours, and then I go to Jewel. And the girl behind the checker is making $14 an hour with her shield, and she's going in every day, and people are not falling like flies at the grocery store. People are not coming. You don't see the grocery store workers sick, and I'll tell you, there's 300 plus workers at that grocery store making sure that every family here who's buying food at Costco or Jewel or any other grocery store is got their table covered. And then you've got your policemen, you've got thousands of essential workers following the state recommended safety pattern so that the families here live. And this school has gone backwards. They fixed the HVAC, we've got the cleaning, we're reducing this, we're doing everything we can as every other organization with essential workers. So I think, you know, as a board member, I start to think, as a Teamster, I'm a Teamster, and if I tell UPS I don't want to go in, they'll say you're fired and the union won't support me. Because UPS said we've done everything, we followed all protocol. If you don't want to work, you don't have a job. And I firmly believe that as long as we follow the state recommended, all the recommendations from everybody that's poured in here, I don't think we're creating a threat for anybody. And we've been told by experts in this country, we have to learn to live. And I see families in Brookfield. The restaurants are full. The grocery stores are full. Costco's full. People are going out. The park is full. People are living a hybrid model. So to think that school is going to be different, I don't understand that. So as a board member, I fully believe that as long as we're monitoring and following all the protocol, we have to move forward.
All right. We have just a few more things to touch on. I'll be very brief. Kevin Baldus is our interim director of special education. Kevin is here tonight. Kevin, do you have anything you want to address with special ed parents? Because that has been a concern.
I would love to hear more about
Especially how an IEP student would even get their services under the remote model.
Yes, I would love to hear about that, and if, I don't know if you are able to, or maybe one of the two of you, and how are we meeting the needs? Because the ISB guidelines, the two groups that are of most concern are our diverse learners and then our EL population. So I'd love to hear about both of those populations and meeting their needs during this time.
Well, I'd start with explaining the structure of special ed underneath different models. If we were to go hybrid, within the populations that we have within our special ed group, I would say that the recommendation is that kids that are within our transition program, core or multi-needs, and others to be determined by case managers would fall into a 4-day-a-week schedule, AM. No alpha split with those kids. Looking at that, those numbers in those classrooms to be located in a certain section of our building. They are at the largest class that size that we'd have at that point with that population in the core or multi-needs would be 13. This would allow those kids to get those essential services that they need that are aligned in their IEPs. Of course, it's not a perfect model, but it's one that many of these kids require us to be in sometimes close proximity to working with them on daily living skills that they've been missing and being at home. Then it gives them an opportunity to get their related services, the speech, social work, OT, PT, the vision and or itinerants and audio itinerants that many of these kids need to have within their IEPs to grow, learn, and hopefully be successful.
That's the law.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Right? That's the law, to meet those minutes on their IEP. If we don't, we're breaking the law.
Under this given world that we're living in, the answer to that is yes and no. At the end of last year, many school districts required their case managers under the guidance of, with Lansing and our director, to create distance learning plans, which were basically addendums that were created to go along with the IEPs to show families how, given the stay-at-home order, that how those services would be met, how they plan on successfully implementing different services that the kids require through their IEPs. The remote option, then we flip over to, let me finish the afternoons. Those kids would still be doing things after they, many of those kids also are ones that need food, to be honest. They need to come to school to get, some of them are on reduced and free lunches, and to get that food to go back home. I was really surprised last year by how well a lot of those kids did in some of the virtual settings that the teachers and case managers created. Some really neat videos and just activities of them that stayed home for like PE and things like that. The teachers got really creative with that. And I like to say that our case managers and teachers in my department are really creative in the things that they're doing. The next thing would be if we were to go remote. I've had many conversations with certain parents with kids within in that population that the Apex isn't going to be appropriate for them. It's meant to be done at a level that is a gen ed setting. Many of those kids aren't able to access that type of curriculum. So giving them the option to still attend school, the morning sessions given remote, again, then they can provide those related services as well. I've had conversations with union rep about that, how our teachers feel about doing that, and they support that decision as well. And then the other option, and if we go to remote, the other option then is if it's a stay-home order by the governor, then that's kind of like our hands are tied, and those distance learning plans are then implemented. There's another whole section, a group of kids that also fall underneath our umbrella. And there are kids that have specific learning disabilities that are typically in all gen ed classes in a co-taught setting, and sometimes have supportive classes like a study skills where they're working on transition goals that they have within their IEPs, and also working on relearning strategies, doing just a lot of different supplemental activities to help keep them up in the area of, for example, maybe they have a math reasoning deficit. I think that those opportunities for those kids will be met through the co-teaching model. I know that Kylie and I have had conversations with our co-teaching groups about some PD and talking about during our Thursday and Friday about how can we make Zoom look and be effective in a co-teaching model, breakout groups within classes, and then and just getting more bang for our buck for those two people in that room with those kids and breaking them out, so we can make sure we meet those IEP needs in minutes through that child's IEP.
Is our number of students who have like severe medical needs, ports, feeding tubes,
Yep.
Multiple underlying health conditions, is that number lower than 10?
Yes. So
Okay.
right now, there's a couple kids that we've already worked with the families that are, because of their being medically fragile, are going to
Right.
be on homebound services, and allow them to still access those virtual sessions as much as they possibly can. But just because of their medical condition, it is
Sure.
very, very unsafe for them to even have some types of option to
Right.
contract it.
So we're working with those families to make
Absolutely.
sure their needs
Yeah.
are being met.
And I commend my case managers of that communication that they're doing. We had a meeting on Friday morning, and I kind of went through everything I'm telling you with them, and they ready to meet that challenge. And they're already communicating with families.
And I just wanted to add, in KB short tenure, you're doing a fantastic job as an interim director of special education, and hearing about your meetings and meeting with you personally, I know you've demonstrated your commitment to meet all of our IEP students' needs. And if we have to come an extra day to school, we will. We will do whatever it takes, not only to service them, but to service them right. The same goes for our English language learners.
Thank you.
Any other questions for special ed? The last thing I'd like to bring is Dave up for Dave Mannon and Beth for social, emotional, and safety. That should cover pretty much the summary of the components. Wes and I did just convene a little bit here to decide that we could shorten the agenda a little bit tonight to focus more on this, because I'm sure you're going to have some more questions and want to have more in-depth discussion.
You don't want me here till 1?
So maybe if we let them cover safety and SEL, the social emotional learning, I can conclude with the portion of the plan. We could take a short break, and then we could reconvene for some more discussion. Dave, you want to touch on the? Well, let me. While we're still on the curriculum and the student piece, Beth, assistant principals for student services, social emotional. I mean, we've heard it from students tonight. We've got a lot of emails from parents. We even talked with the staff. Like, even if we do go hybrid, we have to really focus on the social emotional in the first 2 weeks just to rebuild those relationships. What's the plan from the Student Services Office in regards to counselors, social workers?
Well, our hope is that when students are here for in-person instruction, that they take advantage of that. So we're going to really try and keep them in class and find other ways to connect with students if they need to see their counselor or their social worker. Being creative in seeing them after their class time, or taking them from a study hall or academic support, so they're not missing out on that in-person instruction. I think that we are going to put together videos, especially for our freshmen and our transfer students who have not met their counselor, and push those out so that they can connect a name with a face. We'll be creative in coming up with ways to meet with our freshmen in small groups. Hopefully, some of our teachers will allow us to take some class time, maybe PE time. Maybe we can push into PE and do some small group lessons during PE classes, finding unique spaces and where we can spread out. Seniors are definitely on our minds, and how we're going to support them through the college application process, how we can share information with them so that they can feel supported. And all of that is connected to social emotional, right? The anxiety of what's my next step? How am I going to be supported? Looking at college reps, obviously they won't be coming into the building, so we're having to be creative in how we can come up with opportunities for our seniors to connect with our college reps. Our social workers, counselors, school psychs, I think did a very good job last semester or last quarter given what we had. I think now we're more prepared to have scheduled Zoom meetings with our students, especially the social workers, and making sure that parents know to reach out to us and who to reach out to if they have concerns with their students at home. Maybe sending out a list of things to look for in their students, and
making sure that we're providing the social, emotional, mental help and support that they might need as we go into the school year. We have lots of resources with NAMI pillars. The support is there. It's just making sure that we know who those students are and making sure that they're reaching out to us when they need us.
And we hired we have our 3 full-time social workers now.
So we have 3 full-time social workers, 5 full-time counselors, and a part-time counselor. We have a social work intern, a counseling intern, 2 full-time school psychologists, and an intern. And our interns are great because we can really utilize them to do, kind of check in on students that maybe need something that's more consistent, even on a daily basis at first. And we know who our students are that maybe struggled in the end, and those are our students that we'll reach out to right at the beginning of the year. What do you need from us? How can we help you? How can we best support you as we kick off the school year? Whenever we're hybrid, remote, as we're fluid throughout this semester, we will do all we can to be supportive and try to keep things as normal as possible. We're used to doing group guidance lessons on a consistent basis with each of our grade levels. So it's just coming up with unique ways to do that while not interrupting the learning time that they have with their teachers.
Trey, it's a fast question. Because we know that we may have some students who struggle who ordinarily wouldn't.
Yes.
And our social workers can't be everywhere. Is there any PD that will happen for our teachers? Maybe on additional look-fors, things that they should maybe be paying attention to as they're on with students? Because I've heard from several students today, right, about being depressed, being lonely. I mean, some of our students who maybe never struggle are going to struggle.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think we need our parents to be aware of that because I don't even know how much teachers will connect. And especially too with these masks on, right? Like you're not reading a person like you'd be reading them if they weren't wearing a mask. So I think do we see a pattern in students not engaging when they normally would, or students who typically have been strong students and now we're not seeing that? And again, parents, some of them are struggling with some of their own social emotional concerns. So I think all we can do is continue to push out resources and, to the point of maybe it being too much, where social workers are building, adding resources to our website. But yeah, I know what you're saying about a training. I don't know. It's something I can look into and see what we can do to maybe arm our teachers a little bit better so that they know as well that if you're concerned at all, reach out to Student Services and we'll follow up.
I think West 40 does some trauma-informed practice training, right? Wouldn't that be something
We actually, as a staff, went through that in August of 2018. All the administrators, psychs, social workers, counselors, deans, we all went through that training and were certified.
Nice.
And so I know there's other trainings that are being offered. And so maybe it would be, maybe it's something that we, the social workers and the psychs can almost be like a train that.
Sure, if they could do like train the trainer, right?
Yeah,
or
like they're already
on.
trainers at some level, and we could certainly offer some of our own PD, create something for our teachers.
Yeah, I'm just thinking kids who need the resources don't always reach out for the resources.
Absolutely.
So it's sometimes on the adults to be able to recognize that something might be up.
And actually our students are so great as well. I can't tell you the number of times a student will come into Student Services concerned about a friend, concerned that they're not themselves, they're making comments that don't seem right. So that's something else that I think we need to really instill in our students is that, we need to take care of each other. And if you're concerned, reach out.
And I did want to add as well, many of our teachers do an excellent job in emailing us, in emailing student services with their concerns. So many of our teachers are taking, that step and reaching out to us for help. So I do want to commend many of our staff for doing the trauma-informed care that we're prepared for and involving us, the administration, social workers, and counselors.
So I think one related question or comment, it's probably more for Kristen, is also the support then for our teachers. I mean, we have an EAP program. It's probably, I know from my professional life, supporting staff and all of what's going on in our world is very challenging, and making sure that people know the resources, not just for the students, right, or the families, but also our staff and teachers. That might be something to make sure we're putting front and center of benefits information.
Yes, absolutely. We also have monthly newsletters that we push out that often cover a lot of those topics as well. Okay. So we'll continue to do that.
Dave, the last piece is safety, and this is a big concern. Obviously, there's a lot of moving pieces here. You just want to touch on briefly. I know the parents have seen in the weekly communications, masks will be required at all times, temperature scans, hand sanitizer, all that. Could you just go through that list real quickly?
Sure, yeah, and before I just get to the list really quick, I'm glad that you guys, the board has added resources in Beth's office. In her office and our office, together the Student Affairs office, work side by side in assisting students that have some social emotional related things going on. And in our handbook, you'll see on the back cover, the first thing is a QR code about a concern you have. And so we're really cognizant of that this year. We also want to provide more resources for our teachers in their toolkit. And so we purchased through a title grant the Remind app, and we expanded that app so now that teachers, when they log into the program, they can see their classes, who's in their class, and then reach out to those students through the Remind, which basically will link up. Like if Michael has a phone, shoot him a text that comes through Remind, and you can link up your related Schoology resources for that student as well. So there's a lot of things that we see in our office that we say, okay, it's sanitation, it's face masks, social distancing, but safety goes way beyond that, and that's always in our brain too. And so, we will continue to work. We have been over the summer as well, monitoring our Go Guardian and Bark systems for students that are maybe looking at things they shouldn't, and providing resources for them as well. As far as a return to school and what that looks like, I'm glad that we've had a couple trial runs here. Last week we had a residency event. We were able to socially distance that program out, and I think we had some really positive feedback. And what we've learned is, when spaced out, and so what we did is we walked the building. We were able to mark our hallways and our stairwells in directional ways. So there's going to be one-way stairwells going up, one-way stairwells going down. And as far as the hallway traffic, we're going to stagger our dismissal times. We're going to stagger the end of the daytime as well. So we know that once we distance students and distance our population in this building, we're going to have good results in taking care of the safety aspect as far as the contamination and contact with others. As far as students coming into the building, let me walk you through that. We have purchased a couple of these iPad sensors that are contactless. So when students walk in, you probably saw on the sandwich boards this afternoon or when you came in this evening, there'll be a questionnaire with COVID symptoms on there. We're asking parents to self-certify their students at home to ask those same questions. Do you have these symptoms? We'll be sending some communication out regarding those symptoms and what that protocol looks like for parents here shortly. But after they self-certify, there's no temperature, there's no sickness, they haven't been in contact with any other students that had a positive read. They will then come into the building. As they enter our doors, we'll ask them those same questions. Did your parents self-certify? Do you have any of these symptoms? Were you in contact with anyone that has a positive case? If those answers are no, then they proceed in, where we then do the digital infrared scan, which is it takes like 2 seconds, and then that student can proceed into class. What we're asking students to do, there will be a face mask requirement for all of our students and all of our staff, 100% of the time. I know it gets kind of getting used to here as I'm talking too. It's just one of those things, it's our new norm, to provide safety for our students and our staff. What we're asking our students to additionally do is we have lanyards, and we were fortunate enough to give almost every one of our students an ID that walked through our building last week. We're going to scan that ID as well right after we ask those questions, and that will then certify them that they're in the building and that they're safe. So it's kind of a three-step process. Once they're in the building, they're good to go, and we ask our students to go directly to their class. So arrival times, even though our doors will be open around 7:15-ish, we're really asking our students to be here around 7:35, 7:40, so that they're not, there's not time for them to group up in our hallways, in our common areas, and so on and so forth. Regarding breakfast and lunch, there will be options available. However, it is a grab and go, and we're not going to allow space and or time for students to really eat in like a cafeteria large setting. You know, if they want to take that, go outside, eat real quick, come back in, or an area that we define later, that's socially distance appropriate, we can do that, but there will be options for that as well. And again, we'll define all of these protocols and procedures in a letter here that we have ready to go. But in addition to that, the classrooms are spaced out. Some teachers have asked for additional PPE, such as like face shields and different dividers, provide those, and I know Kristen's been working through the staff with those. And then also sanitation is going to be, one-on-one. We have to get that done. And so, we're going to have to come up with some protocols for staff in regards to students wiping their areas down. We do have buckets and sanitation and all the other requirements that are guided from ISBE's return to school ready to go. So it's a lot. Again, like Dr. Skinka said, it's very fluid, and I think every day we learn something more. We're asking students as they come in to use door A and door G. Those will be 2 access points, and then we'll have those stanchioned off for direction.
I have 2 quick questions. There was a mention made in the visitors' comments about a certain type of mask that is apparently not. Do we have a policy in place that says that certain masks would be deemed not acceptable, and then can we provide one
Sure.
to not send them home?
Thank you for the question. So Kristen applied through the state to receive a cloth mask for every single student that comes in. So on their first day, students will receive, that orientation week, will receive a cloth mask and a lanyard. As far as what our protocols will be, we're asking that those masks cover the face, the nose, and sides. And so whatever that face covering may be, appropriate as deemed by our dress code, that's acceptable.
Okay. And one quick other question. This came, I think the RBA shared a couple of comments that were submitted by various teachers. And one comment specifically mentioned the 6-foot social distancing of desks. And there was reference to something along the lines of the large majority is there, but there are some cases that's not, that where we don't have 6 feet. And I know this from our own, in our office and so forth, that can that be addressed? Because I think that's a legitimate concern.
Legitimate concern, and something that we were just talking about with our facilities manager and Kylie. There is a small percentage of classrooms that still need to be worked out. So whether that's removing additional furniture to provide more space, or looking how we can utilize the classroom setup a little bit more, is something that we'll do within the next couple of days before we get going here. But that's definitely on the forefront.
Thank you.
We're doing the best we can to get to the 6 foot, but in the state guidelines from the Illinois Department of Public Health and the State Board of Education, it says when possible, because they understood. That's why they wanted, one of the recommendations they gave is having students set up in rows, correct, Kristen?
Rows all facing the same direction, yes.
All facing the same direction if you couldn't social distance to 6 feet.
Do we have any ability to move certain classes outside to the football stadium? I mean,
Absolutely.
Can teachers be creative on this and say, let's take science outside?
We already have some teachers that go to the front of the school when they're doing an English unit, or we have teachers that take kids outside already. So we can encourage that as well.
I
We've
think that would
talked
be a
about,
very
do we
good thing
look
to
into
encourage.
tents? So that if there was some inclement weather, teachers could still be outside under a tent. We've talked about that.
If I could also add 2 things, I think it's important to note that every period while students are in a classroom, our buildings and grounds through Joel and our Aramark staff will be cleaning every period, the bathroom door handles, toilet seats, soap dispensers. We've installed touchless faucets in every single bathroom. Drinking fountains will be sanitized, even though we're only allowing the water bottle fill stations. Any benches, handrails, anything that's a common touch point throughout the entire building will be sanitized every single period while students are in class. So I think that's really, and that's something that's really important, door entry handles, just to limit, while we're certainly encouraging students to wash their hands and use hand sanitizer, just another added layer of protection. And then also in regards to our HVAC units, we have been running them earlier and plan on continuing to do so that we change over the air before anyone enters the building. And then in addition to that, we're increasing the number of air changes throughout the entire day so that we're including more outside air cycling through. And then it's important to note that our HVAC units have 3 filters, 2 by the main unit, and then 1 filter at the entry point of every single classroom. And so I think that is incredibly important to mention. In addition to that, teachers can also have their windows open if they have a classroom with windows, as well as their door to eliminate that extra touch point and circulate some air as well.
Can I just ask, if it turns out that there's bottlenecks coming in the building, could we have more than 2 entrances available? Or will more staff be available to just help out? I mean, I've worked in a school for many years, and right, like that mad rush through the door, and then having to stop and ask questions, like I would just imagine there being a bottleneck.
Yeah, so although there's 2 entryways, there's actually going to be 3 stations between those 2. And then the distance that we separate, I don't know if you came in this morning, but there's probably a good, 20 feet or so from the door to the kiosk and where that's going to be stationed at our main entrance. And then at door G, we'll have a similar setup. If we could get another kiosk in time, we'll have 2 stations there as well. And so I don't foresee a large backup. Obviously, when you run a new program, you'll have to see how that goes. But we're going to do our best to social distance and make sure that happens. And then that first orientation week is going to be a good litmus test to see how this goes. Right now, we're doing the infrared guns, but when it comes to the kiosk, it might be a little bit of a different ball game. So we'll have to see how that goes. And those are planned to be here, I think, tomorrow. So.
How many kids have been here for summer sports camp? Because that was also a test, right?
We had 16 summer sport camps with 550 student athletes and 70 coaches.
Okay, so that was
for the month of July. We had a
significant portion of the population.
Correct.
Yes.
Were those coaches?
As well as a driver's ed program that Dr. Freitas mentioned in one of his messages to families.
Were those coaches also?
Guys, I did also wanted to add that of the 92 classrooms we have here, 82 classrooms have been staged for social distancing, with the exception of 10. So our director of maintenance and his staff and Kristen have done an excellent job in staging the classrooms for social distancing. There are some classrooms that are tricky, kind of like the auto shop, right, the carpentry room, like what do we exactly do there, but we're working at it. But our maintenance team and Kristen are doing a great job in addressing that need.
So this third entrance is just for the teachers?
Third entrance would be Q off the side of the building, so the teachers would have to come in the same way as the students. There'd be a temperature station at that as well.
Are they, so how are the self-certifying, the morning self-certify? Is it going out through Remind? Is it going out through Schoology?
So it's not a program that we're going to use on the parents' end. We're asking parents to just orally talk through that process with their student.
Okay.
And then we'll electronically code that we had that conversation and that they had that conversation with their parents through Hero, our
Okay.
Hero program, which we use for our tardies.
Okay,
And that's a simple scan of the ID.
right.
So it's self-certify, Hero scan, infrared scan.
And then the staff?
Staff will go through the same process. We're asking staff to use lanyards and the IDs just for visibility and safety.
Sure.
Is number one. We want to know who's coming into our building. And so
Most
that's why we're asking
schools
our students just to wear those as they
Yeah.
walk through our doors, same thing with the staff.
Yeah, most schools do that now anyways, and have for years, right, as a safety precaution.
Correct.
I think Michael had a question.
Yeah, so what about students that do come in early before that 7:35, 7:40 time? Like, where would they be? Like, would you let them in the school or?
No doubt our teachers are going to want to see, students if we're here in hybrid. Our teachers do a great job of being here early and working with our students. We ask that, obviously we don't want large groupings, but if there's a situation where they need to review before a large exam or assessment, and they want to have a group of 4 or 5, whatever, to go through that, that's acceptable. We just want to make sure that students are supervised in an area that's socially and distancingly appropriate.
What's the earliest some of the academic districts?
So we're going to have information out to parents here shortly, but 7:15 will be the earliest that we're asking. I know in previous years, this building and the culture here has been wide open, and so it's going to take a little bit of an adjustment for that. If there's like a morning practice or something for cross country, obviously that's with the coach and that's something that they can set up. But as far as just students coming into our building, 7:15 will be the earliest due to the social distancing that we're trying to accomplish here. And then again, we actually want to push that a little bit back.
Dave, just make note that if we have half the population, student population here, we still may need a place, whether it's the field house or main gym, somewhere if students are early, somewhere large enough where they can socially distance.
Absolutely. And
gather.
One thing I didn't cover is that we will have an isolation room. We understand that there's going to be a hot read that potentially comes up on our infrared scanners. And if that happens, we're going to escort that student down to our isolation room. Our health office staff will then reassess that student, go over those questions, those self-certified questions again, wait for a couple minutes because we do have a significant amount of students that raise their temperature up and that heart rate and that heat index in their body. So after we go through those assessment protocols in the health and the isolation room, if they're good, then great, go back to class. We'll send a message home to the parent letting them know that we had these conversations. If there's associated symptoms, our notification protocols will be included in the letter that we send out, and then we'll do contact tracing to follow through with that if there is related symptoms, and then we'll ask students to self-quarantine if they have been in contact with someone that has positive, and we'll ask that student and their parents suggest highly that they get tested. If there's a positive test, then we'll contact trace back, and then the specific language again will be in this letter. But any student that has contact with that individual 2 days prior to that positive read will also be asked to then self-quarantine.
So I want to remind the audience, right, that we are bound by HIPAA in all of these things, right? So it doesn't become a witch hunt, what family, what kid, what staff member, right? Like I could be working with all these teachers, and if I haven't come in contact with them in the last 2 days, but one of them gets it, I might not know, right? Unless they tell me in confidence, that's their business, but, right? I just want people to understand that we are bound by those rules, and we're not just going to be like, so-and-so got, yes. Right? It's, if, God forbid, right? I don't even want that to happen at all. It's not why I'm bringing it up, but right? We have all these rules that we are bound by.
I think it's a good reminder about privacy and confidentiality and social media and some of this communication, I think, needs to stress that.
Right.
That these are private matters. I think it may not rise to the level of HIPAA in some cases, but yeah.
It's a great point you brought up about social media, something we talked about with Mr. Mannon, with Lane, our school liaison officer, was that if a student does have a hot thermo scan, they're going to have another process where they go to the nurse and then they get rescanned. They might be fine, but the way social media has worked in the past at RB, like that could spread rather quickly and be a big story about nothing. So, I mean, that is a concern about us, and I think the board wants to make sure we communicate that very clearly.
Absolutely. And the COVID protocols right now are like top on our news and events and under the COVID tab on our website. And then we'll be sending an associated document out that'll walk parents through the process that I just laid out for you today.
Well, and I think there's, one more kind of editorial comment that what I found in my workplace is that we've had very few people ultimately show up and test hot because they're told, if you're not feeling well, stay home. This applies to staff, to faculty, to teachers, to students. Don't just take an Advil and,
hope for the best.
Hope for the best. Truly stay home. And I think changing that culture a little bit with some students who've been driven for perfect attendance or, staff who never wants to miss a day of work. It's okay to miss a day if you're not feeling well. Don't risk it. And that's a bit of a culture shift, I think, in this whole world we're living in.
Yeah. Specifically typically this school with several students, a high percentage taking AP courses and they don't want to miss. And talking with our nurse, Ms. Conway, that's the exact example that she provided was literally if you have any symptoms that, may be related to COVID, stay home. Monitor your symptoms. Don't come to school. Don't put any other student or staff in jeopardy of, getting sick. Take care of yourself, and then let us know. Call our attendance line, and that number will be, again, laid out in the letter. But call our attendance line. Please stay home. Thank you for that point.
Yeah, I think that message has to be reiterated again and again and again and again, because I think parents, well, my hope is that they would not send their students sick, but with only having, for each period, you only see a teacher live if we do hybrid twice. And I think some may be inclined to want to give their kid Tylenol and send them to school. So I think we really have to message that very carefully. And when a student is sick or when they're exposed and they miss 10 days, how do they make up that work? Right? Like, that's a concern. We don't want them to have to worry about that and come to school sick. We have to find a way to make sure those kids that stay home are getting what they need.
So I wanted to cover something because we heard a lot from, from the teachers about how we weren't, in their best interest in taking care of them healthy-wise.
Can you speak up a little bit?
And it concerns me.
Yeah.
And that concerns me because I think we do listen. So there was a number of teachers on this committee, correct, that developed both these plans.
Correct.
7.
Correct.
4 were union leadership.
Correct.
There was a number of coaches in summer camps this year. Are they also, I'm assuming, in the union and teachers?
Yes.
And they weren't afraid to come to school, were they? Or to come to coaching. So if the fear of, I think this one person said it, and I've got to quote it, taking the risk to start in person, anyone getting sick or dying is on you. I suppose he means me or you, Kevin. I take that personally. You'll have to live with that for the rest of your life. The staff will never forgive you and will hate you forever. I'm not sure what kind of person writes that, but it's not a very well-educated person. And it really hurt my feelings. I'm not here. I don't want people to hate me. I want to teach our children the best we can. Dave's gone out of it. Well, you just described to me, it's harder to get into school than it is to get into, the airplane where I work. It's, to your point. I go to work. I'm an essential worker, and I go to Colorado, and I go to Virginia, and I go to Alabama, because that's my job. And I don't have much choice, because I have a mortgage, and I pay taxes here in this district. And that's painful to read these things when we're doing every effort we can. If the teachers say that they are so afraid to come to work, what do we do with sports? How can we reasonably do cross-country if they can't even come to work in the school building? We have to do better for the kids. And I think this hybrid model is going to work. And I think it's the best option we have. Do I want to have the kids sit here every day? Yes, I do. But that's not an option. I get it. We have a committee well represented with the teachers, with the administration, with the stakeholders of the community. We're here as the community. I think we cross-reference this community at the best we have. We have Riverside, Brookfield, North Riverside. I know you don't want to call it Hollywood, but even Hollywood represents.
It's a part of Brookfield!
It's a part of Brookfield. But, and I think we're doing what the community wants, to open the school in person the best that we can, the safest way we can. So.
And if I could just add, I think, and you'd let me know if you agree with me, right? Like, kids want to come to school.
Yeah.
You and your friends.
You heard the students too.
Right. The students spoke and want to come to school. And if we explain to them the seriousness, if we give them the tools to make good choices, we're not talking about little 5-year-olds who, run around and wipe their boogers on each other, right? We're talking about kids who are 13 and up, some kids who are just about to be, right, enfranchised and can vote and fight and die for this country, right? So, like, if we give them the tools that they need to be responsible and to make good choices, I believe they will rise to the occasion. I believe because they want to come to school, they will take it seriously and they will follow the protocols. I work with kids every day, and when I want the best from them, I empower them. That's just, I think, right, this plan puts kids in the center, right? And that's what a school is, right?
Right. Any other thoughts?
All I have to say about that. Oh, Siri was recording that whole thing. Siri's good.
The union and the board will take action tonight, but the union and the board have reached a tentative agreement on an MOU for athletics and activities, which a lot of parents have called and questioned on with the shifting of the 4 seasons of the IHSA, as well as fall play, speech, some of our drama productions. So they have reached an MOU. We have an MOU that the board will vote on tonight that they agreed upon with the RBEA that would allow clubs and activities to both take place virtually as well as in the event athletics runs. There's a way so that if they're approved by the IDPH, coaches can get their stipends and still provide extracurricular activities for students. So the board, the union have worked closely to try to make sure there's also those additional extracurricular outlets, whether you're on remote or on the hybrid model, so that you can still have, whether it's virtually or in person, some extracurricular activities to stay engaged to the school environment, your friends, your peers, your coaches, etc.
Yeah. I heard in the community that some people thought that if they had their child remote, then their child could not participate in extracurriculars. That is not true, correct?
We changed. It was out in the communication that went out Friday, and students will have access if they still want to commit to the Apex model, counselor, social worker, the Apex coordinator, as well as access to extracurriculars.
So I think that's really important, right? Because we're trying to deliver something to the students, and I'm a parent of. Just paid my registration fees, 3 RB students this year. And so separating my role as a parent from my role on the board, but they do tend to merge. And we have an obligation collectively to provide the best experience and education for the students in this building. That has to be, I think, driving the decision-making here. And, this is not the school year I think any of us envisioned in any way, shape, or form. But I think we've talked about extensively in all of our goal-setting discussions, like what is the RB community? And the RB community certainly is the teachers, and I hear them, and I want to be mindful of what they're saying. And I want to encourage them to use the aspects of their CBAs that I have for sick leave and FMLA and accommodations, because those are important HR tools that employees do need to use when they have personal conditions. So I'm not trying to minimize those concerns, but I do believe there are tools to address those concerns. But I also need to hear from the parents, and how many emails have we gotten from parents and from taxpayers and from neighbors, and we have to balance all of those competing needs here, and that's truly the challenge. And in my opinion, the hybrid gets us there in certainly not a perfect way, right? But in a way that is flexible, and I think gets us, 1 week at a time. I think I'm quoting someone here, but that's all we can look for, is going 1 week at a time. So, my my sincere thanks to everyone on that committee and everyone in this building and everyone who's going to be in this building next week, because it's certainly a team effort and it's a community effort, and it's uncharted territory. So we're doing, I think, collectively the best we can.
So I have one, maybe two more questions, but one is safety related. And it goes back to the, there's 4 points listed as the factors that could lead us to having to go to remote. And the first factor lists an outbreak or consistent increase in positive cases within the district's primary boundaries. Obviously, we want 0 cases. That's clear. But if that day comes, I think it's a legitimate question, or something we really ought to discuss now is when a case occurs, what's sort of the way? I would assume this is evaluated on a case-by-case basis. It could be very different scenarios depending on how we find out how many people might have been around. But maybe Dr. Skinkis or Mr. Mann, and can we talk through that a little bit? I'm sure that this is not necessarily prudent to say like it is 3 cases or anything like that, but I do understand the questions of the community and the teachers, because it is a realistic scenario that we could have a case. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Dave, Kristen, feel free to join in. My thought on that is that we would follow the contact tracing protocol that Kristen and Dave referenced, and that if at the time we had a quarantine, even if we had to quarantine a class or a series of classes, I think that would cause an immediate remote shift to remote. If it was something that we found out about that a kid tested positive outside of school and the contact tracing did not clearly develop lines back to the school, I think that would allow us the ability to do the symptom checking and notifying of families where that student may have classes to be monitoring symptoms. And I think that's the biggest concern of the staff. Like they also understand as you increase the number of people in the building, you're increasing the chances of this happening sooner rather than later. And so, there's 2 schools of thought. Should we still go through with it and see if we can, manage that, or not even attempt it so that we don't even get into that situation? And I understand their concern, and I think that's the concern they really wanted the board to hear tonight, was that it's not that they don't want to be around the students, but the concern of like, what if? And I think we've worked close enough with the attorneys on buying their protocols and attending the webinars from the IDPH, the Cook County Health Department, that, at this point in time, we would have to manage that as it comes through. I don't, Kristen or Dave, am I touching on that, or you want to add?
Yeah, I think, it's really important to defer to experts in that case, such as, IDPH and Cook County Health Department. The Cook County Health Department of Public Health specifically said, like, there are various factors that go into whether the health department would recommend shutting down an entire school, and it would depend on the specific case. There are so many different potential scenarios. The health department would work directly with the specific school to determine what the best option would be. And so they said that we can't definitively say what the recommendation would be because each case would be different. So, as we go through this, it's really important not only for us to have the data, but for us to share that data with IDPH so that we can then collaborate with the experts who can tell us, based upon our specific scenario, what they recommend, and then we would 100% follow that recommendation. We did that in the spring when we had our basketball team at Hinsdale South. And there was that, concern about someone at Hinsdale South possibly having COVID. The first thing we did that night when we found out was contacted the Illinois Department of Public Health and walk them through, here's when our team was there, here's the information that we have, and then we deferred to what they told us to do. And so we would continue to do the same thing in this situation too.
Dave, anything?
No, just going through protocols with the county health department. and looking for them for advisement on that is what we've done and what we will continue to do.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I can't hear that.
I just said, just taking the advisement of the county health department and then, giving them the case, laying it out, just exactly what Kristen said.
And
So one other question.
well, it's actually not so much a question. It's more of a statement or a bit of an editorial comment. And, so many things have already been said. But first of all, I would like to thank everyone who spoke tonight for their input, for their feedback. I think it was very thoughtful on the very large majority of them. I think it is important for the teachers to know that we hear them, we hear you. We appreciate the information that was sent just over the last few days. I mean, my experience of this whole discussion was that, there was a summer and we tried to make the best use out of it, and it's a process, and it's not perfect by any stretch, but there was clearly a significant uptick in communications just over starting Friday, over the weekend, and just now. So it is, I can only speak for myself as a board member, but this entire debate is very clearly, by a factor or factors of 10, the most complex issue that we faced as a board. And so I'm going to vote in favor of the hybrid plan tonight, but I also want everybody to know that this is not a black or white decision. This is not a 90% it's clear and what are they talking about 10%. It's not like that at all. We've heard from experts, from medical doctors tonight that have varying opinions. In my personal estimation, this sort of comes down to I don't know, maybe it's a 48 to 52 decision. But I'm in favor of us trying this, what we've talked about. And so I think it's also important, and it's been said also, we can take it only a day at a time or a week at a time, but it is important to recognize that the planning doesn't stop. While we will take a formal sort of up or down vote, this isn't the end. And if I can share one observation, is actually that the strength of this community, when you saw everybody that showed up and actually participated as a parent, citizen, whatever you want to call it, teacher, the quality of that discussion humbles me, because this is the hardest decision that I've taken in my public life, relatively short public life, but nonetheless. So one last comment. Tying to this point about quality, I think it's really rather remarkable, the quality discussion that we've witnessed tonight. That was only possible because everybody participated. And so I am greatly encouraged by the collaborative nature and the good faith that has been put in by all the community members. But I would be remiss in not also stating or making a point that I think the board president started to make. And in this last minute effort and information sharing, there have been a number, not very many, but there have been unfocused, very confrontational, very unfair, and very offensive comments made. I'm not offended. I'm just trying to do my job here. But I take exception to some of the language that has been shared, and when a member of the administration personally gets held or says you will be made responsible if something like that happens, that is deeply unfair, and I think it's offensive. And so I would like to use this as a call to reason, a call to participation, a call to faith in each other. We're all in this together. And when people actually, again, 99% of the feedback is incredibly helpful to us. It helps us do a better job. And so that's what I'm greatly encouraged by. But we're better than starting to use this as another thing that divides us. That's the last thing we need, in my opinion, in this community and state and country. And so let's continue working, bring things up to our attention, and we will deal with it. That is my promise. I know I speak on the behalf of the board. That is our promise, to do this on the highest possible level. And so with that, I will be voting in favor of the hybrid plan.
Okay, any other thoughts, comments? We want to, how do we want to do this? Because we've got a vote later with the.
Take a straw poll.
We just do a straw poll of in favor of the hybrid plan?
Well, do we,
We
can
actually
we
have a
vote now?
vote.
I mean, people are waiting for that, right?
Do we want to just jump to the?
You can jump to I just want to make sure that, I mean, the three, I promised the union this morning in that meeting that I would share their three concerns, and that was the uncertainty of implementation, but we guarantee that there won't be a safety risk. The ability to staff and handle if there's staffing issues with people might have childcare or accommodation requests that need to be addressed. So, just their concern about being able to staff the hybrid model if we have a teacher shortage. And then the third piece was just making sure we could logistically do this. And so I wanted to make sure that I did promise them that I would share those concerns.
Okay,